Just avoid the topic. That makes no sense. And I think we can get rid of prisons, but we cannot get rid of confinement, of all confinement. So this is a differentiation that is not current, and it is not self-evident. But I want to lose a few words about it. We have this guy, Peter Madsen, in Denmark. You may have heard of him, the Submarine Killer. There was a journalist who wanted you with him on the submarine tour. He had constructed his own submarine, and he wanted to construct his own rockets also. He was an inventor of some fame in Denmark. They don't have so many submarines. And now they had Peter Madsen and his submarine. Yeah. And it seems that before killing the journalist on the submarine, he had been watching all kinds of movies of how to kill women, how to take their body parts apart, etc. So his fantasy was very, very lively, and he was focused on this kind of thing. It was his dream. And this is what makes a person a killer and a serial killer. If your whole imagined universe and your imagination of sexual pleasure is filled with gruesome, cruel violence, when these two things come together, sexual pleasure and terrible violence, then you will never be sorry for killing somebody, because it was your greatest pleasure. And you will do it again and again and again. Now, if we say we're going to abolish prison and we don't care about serial killers, we don't want to talk about serial killers, then there's something missing. What we should do is really separate the question of imminent danger and doing something against dangerous individuals, which would be confinement, and punishment. What the Quakers did when they invented the cell prison was that they said, when we want to punish people, we don't want to cut their heads off, but we want to make them spend time under these specific circumstances in a cell prison. We want to punish them. In order, what is to punish? To make somebody feel intentional pain, to make it visible to other people that somebody who does this will suffer consequences, strong negative consequences. This is what punishment is all about. And also it might incapacitate the person to continue doing what he does. But we have to separate the idea of punishment from the idea of incapacitation. What makes the prison so strong today is that everything is being lumped together, and nobody thinks that it might be necessary to analytically divide the different functions of the prison. If we don't divide the functions of the prison, then everybody will say, yeah, the prison is okay. Some people will say, yeah, because it incapacitates. Others will say, because people might find a way to God. Other people might say, well, they might learn something good there. There might be some professional training, and so on, and so on. So the strength of the prison idea is that people today, even criminologists, they are lumping together all these ideas, and then they say, well, we don't know what to do because this is a multifunctional institution. what we have to do, let's take the example of psychic mental illness. When persons have a serious mental illness that puts them into a risk for themselves, or there might be a risk for others, then all countries of the world, they have legal provisions that allow compulsory treatment in a closed psychiatric institution. That is not meant as a punishment. It is meant as an immediate measure to prevent the risk from materializing. We want to avoid a danger for the person and for others. We don't want to punish the person who is suffering from psychosis. We want to save that person. And we know this person can either be a risk to herself or himself or to others. So what we do is we apply confinement to this person, which is not a prison, but it looks a little bit like a prison. But why isn't it a prison? Because confinement for the mentally ill is not intended to harm the person. It is not intended to harm the person. It is not intended to be punishment. Punishment is defined as intentional harm as a consequence for a person's misbehavior. Parents punish their children, unfortunately, as a consequence for their misbehavior. The state punishes the criminal as a consequence for his misbehavior, and the state punishes by applying intentional harm to this person. I want to harm you. That is the message of punishment. I want to do something so that you suffer, and I want to see you suffer. It's a little sadistic. So, why do I want to see you suffer? Because you were doing something that was not good for the group. It was against the law, it was against the authorities, it was against the legally protected good of somebody else. You violated the legal sphere, the legal rights of somebody else, so you made somebody suffer, so the state wants to see you suffer too. So you learn the lesson, and everybody else also learns the lesson. General deterrence and special individual deterrence. That is punishment. If I take a mentally ill person in a state of crisis to a psychiatric hospital, I don't do it to make this person suffer. It's not sadism, hopefully. It is to help this person. So that is a big difference. And it is also to protect society. If this person with a psychosis, for instance, is armed, then this person is a big danger to others. I don't want to punish him because I know he's crazy, but I want to protect society. And there's nothing wrong with protecting society as long as it's not taken as an excuse for inflicting harm. But of course, all these good intentions are normally being abused, like self-defense, also what we had yesterday. But if it's taken seriously, if it's honest, then taking somebody to a mental hospital for reasons of public safety is nothing wrong. It's not punishment. It is not done with the intention to make this person suffer. With our submarine person, it is very similar. I don't necessarily, I may have to punish this person, but if we can divide it analytically, then before punishing this person, I have to get him and I have to put him someplace because I don't know if he will not continue with this behavior. So it's a measure, it's a police measure. I have to neutralize the risk that emanates from this person. And this has nothing to do in the first moment with punishment. And if he is a person who would evolve into a serial killer, I might have to take him for a longer time in custody for safety reasons. I don't even have to make him guilty of that. The society has a right to defend itself against people who we cannot neutralize in another way, but to take him into custody. And there's nothing wrong as long as this is being checked professionally if he constitutes a danger and if he continues to constitute a danger. So for the really, really dangerous people, it doesn't matter if they are guilty or if they are crazy, we have to put them into custody. Now, how can you still say we want to abolish prison? Well, what we can abolish is we can abolish confinement as a punishment. We should never apply confinement as a punishment, but only in cases where people are really dangerous and where we have to do that to neutralize their risk. And when we put them in confinement to neutralize a danger, we don't necessarily have to treat them bad. We might even ask for apology because we take them not because they are necessarily responsible. They might be responsible, but they might also be crazy. So we might also have to apologize and say, we are sorry, we are taking you into custody, not because we think you are guilty, but we don't know how to deal with the danger that emanates from you. We just have to put you into custody. We are very sorry. What you are bringing for society is a service, a sacrifice. Unfortunately, you have to sacrifice your liberty because you're a serial killer. You might be crazy, you might not be crazy, but whatever you are, you will have to sacrifice your liberty of movement, your freedom of movement for our safety. And then there might be a second discussion. Are you responsible? Are you not responsible? Should we punish you? If so, how should we do it? But then my proposal would be, of course, it might be that we find this person responsible. It may very well be that we have to punish this person. But then, for punishment purposes, there would be not a single prison available, because we would have a decision in our society that we may punish people, but we will not punish them by prison, by imprisonment. We will just go back one step beyond the Quakers in 1790, and we would say, no, the idea to use the deprivation of liberty as a punishment was not so good. Then, of course, the question will be, what kind of punishment if we cannot put these people in prison? We have, and this is at the core of the things, we have become so accustomed to prison as the punishment that we are at a complete loss when it comes to the question, aren't there other punishments? And that would be the essential question. There would be two essential questions. Are there alternative punishments to prison? Question number one. Question number two, are there alternatives to punishment? Would it be possible to have a society that renounces punishment in general as such? That is a very much more complicated question. The only guy who No, there are two guys that come to my mind, but they were both half crazy. No, three.
It's like Spanish Inquisition.
Now, the first guy that came to my mind was Friedrich Nietzsche. Nobody will deny that he was half crazy. More than that. Well, depending a little bit on the time of life. And the time when he was hugging the horse, I don't know. I think he had empathy with the horse, and today people have empathy with great apes. So he was a forerunner of the great apes project. At any rate, in the genealogy of morals, Friedrich Nietzsche had written, it is not unthinkable to imagine a society with that high degree of self-confidence or self-assuredness that it could afford itself the greatest luxury there is. And this greatest luxury is to let even those people free and unpunished who commit crimes against society. Now, this is a relatively moderate sentence in the sense of it is not unthinkable to imagine a society that might eventually, etc. So there's a lot of conditions, but at least Friedrich Nietzsche was thinking that it might be possible that a society could live and exist without punishing criminals. The second person that came to my mind, of course, was Leo Tolstoy. It's not that Leo Tolstoy is among us, but which also would be very nice and very interesting. But Ricardo, grande amigo, Ricardo Scheerer. You? Say your name. Yeah, say your name again.
Ricardo Scheerer.
Scheerer, you. We're co-authors. Well, I'm a free rider, more or less. He said, "Oh, you have to be on the cover of this literature," and my contribution is very, very little. So, but he has written a book, Manifesto para abolir as prisões, and he cites Tolstoy among many others. Also prints some interesting international manifestos of groups in Italy and France against prisons, for the abolition of prisons. Okay, the second guy who came to my mind was Leo Tolstoy, and parts of his famous book, Resurrection, a little quote is in this book. Resurrection is a story by Tolstoy in which he somehow, I think it is himself, the protagonist in the book is a person from the Russian nobility who has an affair with a woman who then later becomes a prostitute and a prisoner, and he is full of guilty conscience because he contributed to this fate of hers, and then he follows her through the prison labyrinth and sees all these injustices in society, the land reform that never happened, the emancipation of women that never happened, the social policy that never happened. And then, of course, he also sees the terrible state of the criminal justice system that did a whole lot of things but which had nothing to do with justice. And he describes this in all detail, and then in the end he comes to the conclusion that if one did away with the whole criminal justice system, he was not afraid of doing away with the criminal justice system. People were saying, oh, what would happen? Nothing would be going well in society anymore. Everything would break down in complete anarchy. But he says, oh no, I think things would just be better. There would be less things to worry about, much less suffering in the world, etc. So that's quite an impressive abolitionist view there by Leo Tolstoy. And the third person that comes to my mind who says things will be better without crimes being called crimes and without crimes being treated as crimes and without prisons and without punishment. That was Luke Hulsmann, the famous Dutch penologist, professor of criminal law and criminology. And too bad he cannot be here, just like Leo Tolstoy. But his thoughts are very important and very convincing to a few people, unfortunately, not to many people, but to me they are. And he actually went to every conference of an interesting small group that is called the International Conference on Prison Abolition. In this conference, they have conferences every 2 years normally. The interesting thing is that the people who invented the modern prison, the Quakers, they are now more and more getting away from this idea, and they are at the forefront of inventing alternatives to prison. So they are the protagonists today of this international conference on prison abolition. They were the inventors in the year 1790, and they had been doing everything to reform the prisons all the time. And now more and more of these people, they see this should come to an end. Reforming this whole business has brought us into hell's kitchen. 10 million people in prison. We are still reforming, and it doesn't work. So more and more of these people say, sorry for this invention. Now we want to invent something new. And it's the same people, or their grandchildren, grandchildren. So that's very nice and very impressive, and is another reason to look a little more in detail into the history of the Quakers, etc., and their contributions. And Luke Hulsmann, he was the person who went to all these conferences and had his interminable speeches there. And sometimes they had some effect. And at one conference, he said, people, it's not enough to get rid of prisons. We have to get rid of the penal system. We have to get rid of the whole so-called criminal justice system. So-called criminal justice system, because when you look at it as it works, it is not a system, it's a chaos. You cannot even call it a system. You can call it a system when you make a little textbook and say, here are the judges, here are the defenders. But when you look at how things are really working, the more you look at the real workings of this so-called thing, you will not call it criminal justice system anymore. So what he then did was, let's have a vote. They had a vote, and one beautiful day they had a vote and said, we will not call ourselves International Conference for Prison Abolition anymore. Now we will change our names, just like the Correction Corporation of America now calls it for itself for Civic, buy the shares. The International Conference on Prison Abolition will now be called International Conference for penal abolition. No more punishment. That is something else. That is much more than no more prison. So we have Nietzsche, we have Tolstoy, we have Hülsmann, or we have Generu, Ricardo. And we have these groups in Italy and France and somewhere else. And we have Angela Davis, who at least says, are prisons obsolete, question mark. And we have David Scott, who says, why prison? And so, a few people. So my proposal, just to tell you the proposal, and maybe then we have a little break. My proposal is get rid of penitentiaries, get rid of prisons as places for punishment. How do we get rid of prisons as places for punishment? It's the same as getting rid of capital punishment. If you take out, you have to take one sentence out of the criminal code. That is, for instance, there are the following punishments. Number 1, capital punishment. Number 2, prison. Number 3, fines. Number 4, taking away your driver's license, etc. So, if you take out number 1, capital punishment, then judges will not be able anymore to give you a sentence of capital punishment. Then you can take all your guillotines and your ejection machines and everything and put them in museums, which is where they belong, because there is no such thing as capital punishment anymore. If you take away the right for the judge to hand out a sentence that is called death sentence, then you have abolished it. That's easy. Now, number 2 reads the list of punishments. Number 1 reads capital punishment. We take it out. Number 2 is deprivation of liberty in a prison, in a penitentiary. Okay, we also take that out. No judge anymore will be able to hand out a sentence of 12 years in prison, not even 9.5. So, and if no judge can hand out a prison sentence anymore, then there is no prison sentence, and you can take the prisons under your arm and carry them to a museum. Or turn them in a museum like Alcatraz and Eastern State Penitentiary and a lot of other penitentiaries. So, technically, that is not difficult to do. You just have to take out the possibility for the judges to hand out prison sentences. Technically very easy, but I doubt that it will be done very soon, even though it should. Then you can close down the prisons because nobody will be sentenced to a prison sentence anymore. And then we have the question, and the serial killers, they have to be in confinement. But their confinement does not have to be in a prison. It can be in a nice surrounding, maybe on an island. I will show you one. I will show you, unfortunately it's still a prison, but we will not send people for punishment there, but we will send people because of their dangerousness there. Now, a whole other question is, how many million very dangerous people are there in the world? Then people will say, well, corruption people are dangerous, etc., 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 and then suddenly we have 10 million people in confinement because of their dangerousness. So we have to really talk about who is dangerous. But my favorite place, now these people here, they are there. Where you? Yeah, here we go. That is a Norwegian prison. And you can see that he's a prisoner because he has a tattoo. And he might be one of the murderers, actually, in this prison. And the interesting thing is, it's an island, and there are no firearms, except for one decorative old revolver or pistol of the 19th century that doesn't work anymore. It's a sort of an ornament in the chief's office. But even the wardens, the guards, they are unarmed. And they have all sorts of instruments, like saws for cutting trees, which are in the hands of the prisoners. And anybody who knows the chainsaw massacre, the Texas chainsaw massacre, knows what you can do with a Texas chainsaw. And they have exactly this type of chainsaw. But what do they do with them? They cut trees. Why do they cut trees? Because they are building little log huts. You see, it's all trees, it's all wood. And they use wood for fires, like they do in Norway a lot of times. And when they have their salmon and churrasco de salmon, they need, of course, also wood. And so they have these Texas chainsaws, and they use them, and nothing happens. And the guards help with the fish, and they help eating and help fishing. And they've spent a part of their time fishing, for instance, salmons maybe. As you see, they spend another part of their time like this. But they also work. They have animals, and they have chicken and all sorts of larger animals. But they are not being tortured. They are not being killed by the guards, and everything is okay. And they themselves might be murderers. And that is about 80 kilometers from Oslo, and it's about 2 or 3 kilometers from this little wooden area that you see in the background. And there has never been an escape, even though there's a boat and everything, a ferry boat. So, now, this would be a place, if we don't send people there for punishment, we could send them there like the submarine person. Well, would he escape? They don't even have video cameras there. So he might, I don't know, maybe we would have to provide some security measures there for the submarine. I don't know. I wonder. At any rate, this looks to me less like a punishment and more like a security device. You put somebody on an island and you say, you're going to stay here. And so what we do need for crazy people and for serial killers and for similarly very highly dangerous people is a kind of deprivation of liberty, but it does not have to be a cell prison. It does not have to look like Carandiru or Alcatraz, and it can look like this, as long as it's safe. And as I said, for some people you might have to have some more safety devices. Yeah, I think now has come the time to dream about these kind of confinement and to have a little interval.